All right, Rob and myself here. I want to talk about two articles today, both of which we've reviewed. I'll start it off. There was a article on War on the Rocks about a year ago. It's a 2023 article titled "Addressing the U.S. Military Recruiting Crisis." It was authored by David Barno, who's a retired general, and Nora Bensahel. Both of them teach now at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And it was an interesting article just from the statistics they were able to pull together on some of the contributing issues that are leading to the military recruiting issues seen in 2023 and that have continued into this year. So when this was authored, they didn't have full data for 2023. And essentially the short and skinny is that the Army's missed its goals for recruiting in 2022 and 2023 by 25,000 personnel and 15,000 personnel, respectively. Navy has also missed mission in 2023. The Marine Corps met mission for recruiting, and the Space Force met mission. And I think those, from what I was reading, those numbers are maybe a little bit skewed for the Marine Corps because they've added some pretty serious retention bonuses and options and stuff like that. So their retention numbers have been up, and therefore their recruiting quotas have been down. But they identified in the article some of the major issues seen and then had some recommendations to potentially prep for it that I think we can discuss. But I'll go over some of the major statistics. So obviously the biggest one is just eligibility. So as of right now, only 23% of young people in that target audience for first-time enlistment into the military are eligible, which is pretty insane. Just 23%. That's dropped from 29% just a few years ago. They attributed it to a couple of different things. One, obesity rates have risen. So within that population, you're looking at a 19 to 22% rise. ASVAB scores have declined by 9%. ASVAB is kind of the entry-level intelligence test to make sure you're eligible, and there's a pretty strict cutoff. There's also been an increase in mental health drug prescriptions. So this is pretty wide ranging, but that can cover anything from kind of depression related drugs to ADHD drugs. And then overall, there's just been some trends. You've seen a drop in surveys in terms of confidence within in the U.S. military from the U.S. public at large. That's dropped from 72 to 64%. And one other stat with one follow-on stat, there's been a drop of veterans who would recommend service to a family member. So that's dropped from 75 to 63%, which is really significant because 80% of those who join the military have a family member who has served. So there's kind of an important connection there, and losing, for whatever reason, some confidence in the U.S. military. I think that could be attributed to a lot of different things. The authors also point out some politicalization of the military. So in recent years, you've seen the left accusing the military of harboring right-wing extremism and the right accusing the military of like wokeness or DEI style politics. The authors cite a bunch of studies that essentially disprove both of those. Hard to tell, what's true and what's not true in that regard. But those are the major contributors to this really significant military recruiting crisis and kind of the eligibility around it. Any thoughts on kind of those initial stats?
Yeah, I kind of just did my own fact checking on this, and and I took a look at one of the reasons they cite, which is interesting for a decrease in recruitment, is that we don't have any wars ongoing right now. So I just took a look. I just asked AI to look at past recruiting issues since 1976. I think the draft ended in 1973. So that's when we went to all volunteer force. And interestingly, there was one in the mid 2000s, and the reason cited for the decrease in recruitment then was that there were ongoing wars.
Right.
So I kind of found that a little questionable. The other thing that I took a look at was just I had read some article, is in my mind, or a headline that quite a bit of the U.S. military volunteers over the years have come from Southerners, specifically white Southerners from South, Southern U.S. And I couldn't find that article again, but I did find some stats on recruitment that was based on race. And according to what I found, in 2018, white recruits made up 56% of all Army recruits. And in 2023, just 44%. In actual numbers, that went from 44,000 down to 23,000 recruits those years, which I thought was really interesting. And then I took a look at, the recruitment of African Americans and Hispanics over those same times. And the numbers for African Americans and Hispanics, actual numbers, didn't change that much. But as a percentage of the recruits, they went up because the white recruitment went down. So I think, just taking a look at this, that the real focused issue here is probably on recruitment of white, probably primarily men, has decreased significantly in 5 years for whatever reason. I know the authors cite politics as one of the reasons. I think they have some interesting things to say about the number of people that are eligible now. They point out that, past marijuana use used to be a disqualifier, and that probably needs to change. It's just legal in so many states now. Antidepressant meds was a disqualifier, but it's okay to get those meds when you're in the service. So they think that should be changed. And then they cited dependents. In other words, they don't want to recruit somebody who's not married who has a dependent child or a kid. And but if you are in military and you're not married and you have a kid, you can still stay in. So they took a look at that. And I guess when I went to the Coast Guard Academy, actually you couldn't have a child or be married and stay at the Coast Guard Academy. And I actually had a classmate who had a partner and had a kid when he was in school and just didn't tell anybody. And then once he graduated, he let everybody know, and so he was safe to stay in. I thought that was kind of interesting. But I guess in military academies now, that if a cadet has a child while he or she is still in the military or is still in the academy, they are able to stay in the academy as long as they do a temporary guardianship for someone else. So I guess that can change. But I think they're kind of missing the bigger point here. And the bigger point is, why specifically has the number of white recruits decreased? The other thing is, they cite this statistic of how many people are eligible now, and they cite, obesity and stuff like that. But I'm not too sure those stats are that different from 2018 to 2023. So I think these authors really missed the point here. And I think that the drill down that we need to do is, why have the number of white recruits decreased so much in these years? We're talking 44,000 to 25,000. 44,000 in 2018 to just 25,000 in 2023. And I'm not too sure what that is. I couldn't find any statistics again on what percentage of white recruits come from the U.S. South. They may or may not be out there. But I teased you, Charlie, about this before. I know you grew up. You went to school in South Carolina. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up there, or where did you grow up?
I was born in New York and then moved to Jersey and then moved to Virginia. primarily grew up in Virginia and then went down to South Carolina for college.
Yeah, I don't know if I could call you a white Southerner, but they probably would say since you're born in New York. But certainly that was my experience, at least not so much when I was in the Coast Guard Academy, but I spent a semester at West Point. And there were a lot of cadets there who parents or fathers had been in the military, actually gone to West Point, and they were from, southern states. Anyway, I think that is the focus right there. I'm not too sure why that stat wasn't covered by the authors and why it wasn't drilled down better, but I found overall the article fairly lacking.
Yeah, I kind of did too. I think there's definitely some truth. They do cite some JROTC, which is like the high school programs and the location of those. And they are overwhelmingly in the South, ranging out to Texas. So there's probably something to that for sure. And I think anecdotally, my experience is the same. There's a pretty significant number of white guys from the South who join up. And I think that can be related to a million different things, but more than likely it's that stat that they provide on how much more likely an individual is to go into the military if they have a family member who entered the military, right? So, you have had a history of white Southerners who have gone in over the past however many dozens of years, and so that trend continues. And perhaps, that could be related to the drop in, if there is a drop in white Southerners, we don't know. That's going to certainly be impacted by family members' willingness to recommend that to, their nephew or their son or whatever the case may be. I think the obesity rate is obviously pretty insane, right? I mean, if you're talking about anybody between, I think it's 18 and 39 that they look like, and you only have 23% of people who are eligible, period, that's a pretty massive number. It's one thing to miss recruiting numbers during relative peacetime, but having that bench to be able to pull off of in case of something abroad, it's just not there, right?
I think that's a distraction because it wasn't that much different in 2018. Maybe it's increased a little bit, but I can't believe that. I mean, there are plenty.
Yeah, that's true. But if you're looking at this, obviously the big stuff going on in the world that's kind of might pull the U.S. into something would be in Ukraine and in Taiwan, right? Those are the two big hotspots, and those would require a major war recruiting effort and possibly a draft. Whereas 2005, the size of the military went up, but not significantly. So if you look at the increase in size of military for the global war on terror versus Vietnam, that's significantly different, right? Primarily because we maintained an all-volunteer force during the GWOT versus Vietnam when a draft was put into place.
I don't know. I mean, I'll stand there. Yeah, I just found one stat that said about 40 to 40% of Army recruits come from the southern U.S. states. And if I think about private U.S. military colleges, VMI, Virginia Military Institute in the South, the Citadel in South Carolina, the state or the colleges with really strong ROTC programs, Texas A&M, Virginia Tech. There may be more, but those are two that stand out to me. The only northern type military academy that I can think of is Norwich. That's just because we competed against them in sports when I was at the Coast Guard Academy, and they're in Vermont. Do you know of any other like strong ROTC programs? I mean, like at the level of Texas A&M and Virginia Tech?
No, I know. I mean, I think you hit the big ones. I think Texas A&M is, if I remember correctly, is the biggest provider of officers in the military, like more so than any of the academies. But that's looking at officer side, right? They're talking about in this article specifically about enlisted recruits.
I know. I'm just trying to point that out in terms of the Southern influence of.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think I think that's without question. I think where I was really scratching my head on this one was some of the author's recommendations. So I'll cover these real quick. One was expanding an Army program called the Future Soldier Prep Course. So essentially, these guys ship out. So let me back up. If you have a potential recruit who either doesn't meet the body weight BMI index and or doesn't have qualifying scores on the ASVAB, I guess they qualify for this Future Soldier Prep Course, which ran a pilot program at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. And it was successful. I think they were able to get like a 93% success rate in getting either guys with weight loss or getting their test scores up, or both. So they recommended expanding that program, eliminating a rule against permitting recruits with dependents, as Rob mentioned, allowing people with treatable mental health conditions to serve, eliminating the prohibition on previous marijuana use, increase outreach of active U.S. forces to civilian population, expand JROTC, recruit more women, and reduce politicization of the military. I mean, all of those seem like negligible results in terms of total people you can reach, right? I mean, all of those it's like 0.5% kind of thing. And I mean, I guess the military has its hands tied, right? They are you got to work with the population that you have on hand, but even just the fact that you need something like the future soldier prep course is a bit depressing, right? Because that's essentially, no offense intended, anybody's ever been to that course, but that's a summer school mixed in with fat camp. You know what I mean? And that seems crazy that's just something that we have to do now. And the remainder of them just don't seem like they would be significantly impactful, with the exception of the mental health drug prescription stuff. So I just looked up ADHD stats, and that's obviously significant. So what I found online was reportedly 1 in 10 sophomore, junior, or seniors in high school have ADHD, and 65% of those take medication for it. So that's a pretty big chunk, right? That's 6.5% of what could potentially be that, prime enlisted recruiting age. So that might be impactful. I don't know enough about the drug itself, like Ritalin or Adderall or any of those drugs to say whether or not it'd be impactful. But I do know a couple cases of guys who tried to recruit and reported that they had a ADHD drug prescription and were denied entry. And those couple of guys that I know were really standout people, right? They would have been good soldiers or whatever they decided to do. So that seems like something that potentially could have some impact. But overall, it just seemed like kind of missing the mark on what needs to be done.
Yeah, again, they point to the stat of how many people are eligible, but they don't compare that to what it was like in 2018 or the past. So I don't know if there's a big difference between, when recruiting was okay and when it is now. So that's kind of a factor in there. It's interesting. They talked about the Top Gun movie and how that helped with the Navy and Marine Corps recruiting. And I can't think of a Top Gun like movie that's based around the U.S. Army. I mean, if you think about the war movies, Army, Black Hawk Down, Platoon, there's been nothing that says rah-rahs. Top Gun. Can you think of a Army movie that's been as rah-rah as Top Gun?
Yeah, probably Black Hawk Down. I was going to say Platoon probably isn't a great recruiting.
Well, Black Hawk Down isn't exactly rah-rah. I'm not, it's not
yeah, but it's, it's still
it's just
an action movie of sorts, Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
They do cite to your point, like comparing against 2018, they do cite pre-COVID stats to now, right? And that's the 6% drop from 29% eligibility to 23%. Um, so that's fair. Maybe not exactly in your window, but
I saw that was
2019
decreased.
to
The
now.
decrease in they had like a decrease in AVAB scores of 9%. That is significant and points to the educational loss during COVID. We're going to
Yep.
be affected by that for years. What's interesting to me, and I guess I've never seen this, is I just think about my own experience, my generation, the first generation to go to college in my side of the family. I had like a sister and a cousin who preceded me, but we were the first ever in both sides of our family to go. But if you think about just the career, if you think about the recruiting or being enlisted in the military as a trade, um, and the career and economic advantages of that compared to almost any other trade, it's pretty significant. I mean, if you were to, compete, becoming a apprentice electrician versus, enlisting in the Army and where you would be in 20 years. It'd be interesting to take a look at that, but certainly I think you're definitely not going to be able to retire after 20 years and have, retirement for the rest of your life and healthcare for the rest of your life being an electrician. That's interesting. I've never seen that in an ad before. I guess all the ads you see for any type of military recruitment is be all you can be, stuff like that. It's just an interesting deal. I do know that recruitment has decreased with strong economies and low unemployment, and we certainly have low unemployment right now. That's consistent, so there has to be some kind of contributing factor. The one thing that they do talk about or mention is the politicization of the military, and I know that we've written about that in the past. With generals taking political stands and issues with DEI in the military and stuff. I'm not too sure that has a lot of effect. I'm not too sure that, high school kids are thinking about that much, but maybe their parents are. And, like you said, I think the decrease in the number of veterans who'd recommend family members go to the military, that may have an impact there, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. So just for discussion's sake, Rob, you're king for a day. What are you doing to fix this? And I think you could expand this beyond just necessarily military recruitment, but obesity rates in kids, pretty high levels of mental health prescription, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the obesity rates and stuff, I think, again, I just don't know how many. I think I would really want to drill down on this decrease in white enlistment and kind of figure out what is the cause of that. It's been significant, and I think if you were to take a look at the recruitment issues right now, if Hispanics and African Americans have stayed the same, that this decrease that we're having is white people for whatever reason, and I just don't know what the reason for that is, and I don't know how you'd even find that out. But there is certainly a tradition, and I think I know that I'm just reading, where, Texas, Florida, Georgia have always been high levels of members who serve in the military. North Carolina, and there's proud traditions in those states, and a lot of veteran populations in those states. So for whatever reason, something's happened there in these last few years. So I don't know. I don't know what I would do. I think we need some more information.
We don't know that for sure, right? That's a hypothesis, but we don't know that for sure at this point.
I think the military know it. I just can't find the specific stats. They might be out there, though. I'm sure the Army knows where its recruits come from.
Oh, I'm sure that too. We just don't know that's the primary problem. Could be. I don't know.
Well, we do know that the number of white recruits has decreased significantly.
Mm-hmm. But that could be anywhere.
Oh yeah, you mean you're talking about the southern U.S., right? I see what you're
Well,
saying.
no, I'm saying nationwide. If there's
Right.
a
In
if
other
there's a
words, the
decrease,
the number of white recruits nationwide could be down.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm not too sure how you'd address that. If it's some kind of political thing, that's tough to even wrap your arms around, or how you'd address it. But this idea that veterans aren't recommending. Did you see any stats in there about? I mean, were veterans recommending, their relatives go in the military more in mid 2000s than now? I think I just saw the stat that most don't do it now. I didn't know if there was a change from before.
yeah. It's a drop from 75% to 63% of veterans who would recommend service. So that's big. I mean,
That is big,
that's a
yeah.
major drop.
What would be the cause of that?
I don't know. I mean, that's where I think you're right. I don't think, for the most part, the vast majority of young people care about politics necessarily, but I think that veteran organization could be, and to be fair, if you look at the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War and how those things ended up, those were two wars that were politically driven, right? Iraq certainly, and then that's what Afghanistan kind of turned into. And so, and then looking at how Afghanistan ended, and the shit show, the withdrawal, and all those things. I mean, I think those could certainly be factors for veterans in terms of whether or not they would recommend it to their nephew or niece or son or daughter.
Well, you're a Afghan vet. Would you recommend that your son go to the military?
Uh, yeah, but I think the political climate is certainly something that impacts me too. It's like, oh boy, I mean, particularly if you're looking at uh, the likely hotspots, like something like Taiwan. It's like, well, would I recommend my son to go into the military and potentially go fight China over an island that we don't have a um, any kind of agreement with necessarily in terms of mutual defense or any of that kind of stuff? And that would obviously be much more on the scale of what you're seeing in Ukraine and Russia than what the global war on terror would be, in terms of what we would lose probably. And so, yeah, I think I've thought about that. My son is 6, so he's young. He's got a lot of time still, but I think I would have to take a hard look at what the world is like and what our leadership is like, and that would certainly impact my recommendation or lack thereof.
Yeah, I have 4 kids and 2 older ones, both in their late 20s, or one's 30 and one's 28, I think. And both my sons, I encouraged them to go to the military, but they just weren't interested ever, even though I was, since I was really young, I knew I was going to go in. And now I have 2 younger kids, and that's interesting. As I consider, my recommendation has nothing to do with the politics. I just find my military experience is just so much opportunity. Just my own experience, meeting people, seeing stuff, economic opportunity, just a little bit of adventure. Yeah, I certainly think, the military can be just really exciting. And I have a young daughter too. And especially for women, I think military is just an incredible opportunity. I hope she becomes a fighter pilot, or something like that. That'd be awesome. But so I don't see it in terms of the political stuff. It's interesting you consider that. But I think that is, it's interesting. I never deployed I never deployed or was in a combat zone, for Christ's sake. I was in the Coast Guard. So your experience is a lot different than mine. And I think that they're and you know better than me, my sense is that there are a lot of war and terrorism veterans out there who certainly, have mixed feelings about their service. And that recommendation, I imagine it's similar. I don't know if it's similar, but it'd be interesting to compare. I don't know if we have the stats to compare, the same veteran recommendation for recruitment after Vietnam, although a lot of those guys were drafted in, right? So it's a complicated situation. But I guess going back to this article, I found it kind of shallow and didn't really drill down enough. And I thought there'd be, I think there's more to it that we're missing the point. And from my perspective, this decrease in white recruitment is key in somehow figuring out why that's happened and how to address that.
Yeah, I was pretty disappointed in the recommendations they provided. It just seemed like it would not impact anything. I did look up obesity rates in high schoolers over the last 40 or 50 years. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, 1970s, 5 to 6% of adolescents were classified as obese. 1980s, it goes up to 10 to 11%. 90s, 15%. 2017 to 18%. In the 2010s, 20 to 21, and then to the present, 21 to 22%. So I mean, that's a lot. It's crazy. I don't know what you can do about that except have way more gym classes, and I'm probably biased because it's such an important part of my life and it's turned into part of my career and stuff like that. But I see it now. I was just dropping off my kid at school, and you just see little kids who you're like, what are you eating, man? It's like, Jesus.
Well, let's if we're done with this, let's turn to my article. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So this is an article about Kilian Jornet, and is in Outside Magazine, and kind of fascinated with this guy. He's like the Michael Jordan, or Kelly Slater of mountain running, ultra running, ski mountaineering, and his career has just been phenomenal. Multiple world championships, multiple World Cups in both ultra running and ski mountaineering racing, multiple fastest known times for climbing peaks, Mount Blanc, Denali. I don't know if he still holds his records, but he, just in my own universe, he kind of started this, fastest known time to get up and down these peaks. And, like he climbed Denali from base camp in 11 and a half hours back, base camp to base camp, which usually takes several more days to do. And he's kind of a genetic freak. He's 5'7", weighs 128 pounds. So I'm 5'7", and I weigh like 160. So he's packing, 32 less pounds up the mountain, which is just amazing. I can't imagine being that lean, or skinny, I guess. Certainly he hasn't done a lot of strength training. I think I was trying to remember when I was a freshman in college, I think I weighed 145. So, I was, 20 pounds heavier than him even back then. And I was, looked like a, young boy at the time. So that's really interesting. And he has, his VO2 max is like 92. It's been measured at 92 to 94 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Jesus. And that's high. I mean, I think there's one, I read some stat was like one of the top 5 ever measured before. There's I think it's a Norwegian cross country skier had 96, but at his peak, Lance Armstrong was measured at 85. I did this when he's 36 now. I think when I was like 37 or 38, I remember doing this test. I only done it once on a treadmill, and mine was like 50. And I went back to Jackson, and one of my athletes was a former competitive cyclist and ski mountaineer and a guide, and he was at 85. His VO2 max. So, and the VO2 max is it's mostly genetics. I think you can increase it 10 to 20% based on training, but it's just your ability to metabolize oxygen and use oxygen, which means you just have, it's really a measure of lung size. The guy has massive lungs. But he's also done some really interesting stuff in terms of his own training, especially when it comes to nutrition. Like he he really has done a lot to develop the fat burning cells or fat burning metabolism of his body. And he's done this by fasted training. So he'll go in long training runs and stuff and not take any food, which means he's starving himself so his body can't use carbs and has to use fat to metabolize and give him energy. He's also done that on the hydration side. Like he did this Denali climb, 11 and a half hours. He just took 1 liter of water. I was reading now where he, if he goes on any run, in this article, he said that if he does anything now in the summer, he doesn't take water at all. And in the winter, he only takes half a liter. Which is really interesting. He's trained his metabolism to not need nutrition essentially during these events. And what that does for him is it means he can just go lighter. He doesn't have to carry food or, water or as much as other people. And, as every decrease in pound means you're moving faster. I saw some, I think, stat in this article where, he was measured for his time, like running uphill in a recent race. He was doing like 7:13 up a mile miles, running uphill, like 30%, which is just amazing. So he's really a genetic freak. And I thought it was just interesting to kind of talk about this and I don't know. I'm just kind of fascinated by this guy. He's kind of started. Oh, another thing he's done sleep deprivation training. So he's worked to, do long events on sleep deprivation to, mimic what he might have to do, during one of his fastest snow climbs or outside or whatever he's doing, which is kind of interesting. I think could be something we could think about in our programming for selections and stuff like that. We don't really program that in right now, but that's certainly something you'll face at selection is, sleep deprivation and having to perform a sleep deprivation. It's probably good to train that before you get to the real thing. But it's interesting that he's done that with himself. So, you can go on very little sleep and you can, train that ability. Anyway, I thought that this individual, not only his genetic, I guess he's really done a lot with his big lungs he was blessed with. I just kind of find him pretty fascinating. I don't know if you saw the same, Charlie, but what do you think about that guy and this article?
Yeah, I mean, incredibly impressive. I was looking at the sleep aspect of it, and he was sleeping 3.5 hours a day for the first 3 to 4 days of his trip, and then bumped it up a little bit to 4 hours and 49 minutes on the second half. But I mean, based on the output, that's incredible. I guess sleep, I haven't really ever looked at this. I don't know if you have. The only thing I'm aware of really from like a sleep training perspective is for sailors, being able to get on like solo sailors who will essentially cat nap for X amount of minutes every couple of hours so that they're never fully out. But I've read on that, like you either train yourself to be able to do it or you go insane, which seems like a fairly high stakes thing to to play around with. You could definitely get used to, less sleep for sure. But I mean, that his amount of sleep is pretty impressive, just considering what he's doing during the day, which is just running up mountains over and over again.
Yeah, my own personal experiences. I remember just at the academy, I would average 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night, and then catch up a little bit on the weekends. But that's kind of prevailed for me, and I generally get 4 to 6 hours sleep a night now, and I'm able to go. I had a email question the other day, about a guy, who's on duty. Like I think he was doing 24/72 shifts as a patrol officer, and he wondered about My recommendations for those types of athletes is to train right before their 24-hour shift starts, and then to train right after it ends. so they can do as much training, in duty at station as possible. And I've done that several times where I've trained on little or 2 hours or less sleep and have been fine. But I don't know if that's something that I've developed over the years or trained. But it is an interesting idea of to train for sleep deprivation. I haven't really thought about that. In our context, I've only seen the negatives of it. And I know that one of the fire captains that we've worked with over the years was warning about the long-term effects of sleep deprivation from his service. Where he's on duty and a lot of firemen at the station, and, they'll get woken up from many, many calls. And so it's not uncommon to get no or very little sleep, during their duty day. And it's hard to catch up from that if you need more sleep. But yeah, I think this idea of training for sleep deprivation is something that certainly I need to consider as we make recommendations for athletes or military members who are going to military selections for us, and maybe even on the mountainside. I mean, I haven't done any trip like this guy, obviously, but I have done just in the Tetons, the Cathedral Traverse, which is 3 peaks in the Tetons, I think. And, we started the trailhead at 2 a.m., so I maybe got 2 or 3 hours of sleep before that. And then, we got back, it was like a 12 or 14 hour, maybe even been longer. I can't remember how long it was, but it was like, near dark when we got back the next day. So certainly it's possible, at least for one event like that. Anyway, I think it's just interesting, not only what this guy has done in terms of training his metabolism, so he doesn't need nutritional supplementation, liquids or carbs, and then also training sleep deprivation, I think is really interesting and unique for him. I'm not too sure how many other athletes have done that in his world, although it's common in the events and everything. And I think he's definitely led the way in those areas.
The fat adaptation stuff is pretty interesting too. It just seems like that's so specific to the individual, whether or not, obviously like keto and all that stuff has got a lot of press for a while, and seems to have kind of died down a little bit, but it just seems like for this style of work, he's taking in an incredibly small amount of carbs. He just takes a gel pack, a couple gel packs, and hits it every hour, which is normal for, a run on fairly flat land, but for the kind of altitude he's covering, which is obviously going to increase the output, it's pretty impressive. You've been low or no carb for quite a while, right?
Try to, yeah. And I don't say no, but definitely low. I'm kind of back to my protein shake diet. And it's just hard to honestly keep my weight down as I grow older. And I have recently started doing protein shakes. Like I put just recently like hemp seeds in with my protein powder and chia seeds or whatever. It just gives it a little bit more and mix it with ice and put it in a blender, and it gives it a little bit more volume, I guess, and helps fill you up more. But as I've gotten older, certainly my appetite overall has decreased, and but my metabolism has slowed considerably. So I need to got to be on top of it as you get older. I got an email from a guy in his 40s, and he said, "Yeah, I've gained weight. I don't know how it happened." And I said, "Yeah, you turned 40, and so it just kind of happens." So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see. But I've never gone full on, keto, or whatever. I did try that for a while, and I found it hard to eat that amount of fat. I like that protein first approach, I guess, primarily, and try to keep just good carbs rather than bad carbs, and that's tricky, but are difficult in our world. But yeah, I haven't really trained that adaptation seriously, but I've never been a serious endurance athlete. And I certainly think I can see advantage for those types of athletes to do that. not only to be super lean and super light. I mean, my recommended professional mountaineering or professional mountain professional weight for someone 5'7" is 145 pounds. And he's at 128. So this guy, and I read that his body weight is similar, in terms based on his height to what other, high level, mountaineers or ultra runners or cyclists would be. So, I mean, to be at that level, you have to be really, really, light. I don't know, and skinny, but also he's not carrying a lot of muscle mass around that isn't useful.
Yeah, it's impressive. I mean, I haven't done anything close to what he's doing, but when I have big days, which is usually, something like even when I was training for and running a couple of ultras, I mean, I crushed carbs. I needed it, or else, because I tried to play around with staying at a lower carb rate, and I could feel like almost immediately just energy drop. It's just impressive what he's able to do with what he's eating.
Yeah, his ability to go without any nutrition for these long events is certainly unique. I know when I started getting serious about and disciplined on the mountain events I would do, the long ones, and just doing a gel or something every 45 minutes, which is the recommendation, that made a huge difference, just in terms of keeping the engine going. So, yeah. Anyway, I mean, that's what helps make him elite. I guess he's using his lungs, and then through his disciplined training, it can't be easy not to eat anything or go on no sleep, obviously. So, I think that goes back to on our selection program too. I'll recommend that guys, try to match what they expect to eat at selection as they get in the final 2 weeks or 3 weeks of their programming, so they're not hit with with something, gut issues that they may have that they're not used to when they get to the real thing. And it's unclear to me exactly how much. If I know Ranger School, certainly they do. They starve those guys. It's not unusual to lose 30 to 40 pounds going to Ranger School. So there's some, focused, nutrition restriction there. But I haven't heard that for the other selections.
Yep.
I know when we talked to Kelson, I think he said he actually gained weight at Buds, so that was interesting. And unexpected. I do know I spoke to one guy who went to Delta selection, and they were able to, I don't think they had any restrictions on their actual meals they were served, but they could also supplement with, with the protein shakes and he actually did his, rucking with like a hydration vest or a nutrition vest that ultra runners wear with gels and stuff all right there. So it's just interesting to think about, but to match. And again, from my perspective, he does this to keep his, what he's carrying with him down, his load down. And I guess he sees a trade-off in terms of being lighter in terms of his load versus having that energy boost. He definitely thinks it's more advantageous for speed to be lighter, which is really interesting.
Yeah, well, I guess when you've got a 95 VO2, you can weigh 127 pounds. You can make some sacrifices there, right?
Yeah, if you're carrying 5 extra pounds of food, that's, I don't know what percentage that is of your body weight, but it's significant. I remember I had to do a nutrition plan for one of my athletes, and she was doing some climb, a ski mountaineering climb. And it was just based on the recommendations from, I think it was GU for the gels, like one every half hour or 45 minutes. And it ended up being like 8 pounds of food that she was recommended to take to do everything for her. I try to get that down, but based on the recommendations, if you're supposed to eat one of these I don't think anyone really does that, carrying 8 pounds of gels up for a 24-hour event. But maybe, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what, even ultra runners, I guess they have stations where they get nutrition stations. I guess the longest I've done is I've done a 50-mile event before. I can't remember how much food we had, just sandwiches. We had plenty of food, but anyway, really interesting.
Yeah. Impressive guy. All right, cool. Any other notes on any of the stuff from today?
Nope, that's it for me.
All right, we'll end it there. Thanks.